The next scene might be the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in a movie, but it was great. Hey, welcome to Blaze Movie Review. Today we are reviewing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Alright, so going into this movie, I knew it was nominated for a lot of awards, a lot of big time actors. You got Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, Maggie Robbit, the blonde girl, and Quentin Tarantino. Typically I like Quentin Tarantino films. This movie was 160 minutes, pretty long, 2.5 hours just about. And I broke this movie up into 3 segments while watching. It was a long movie. For a Tarantino flick, this was actually pretty clean. There's a surplus of swearing, brief sexual content, no nudity, and for about 90% of this movie, there was no violence. The last 10% of this movie, however, had more violence than 90% of all movies. To be honest, this movie was pretty hard to get into for me. I found it very boring. I'm not really into the cinematography and artsy shots. I continuously found myself asking, why did they need that 2-minute scene of Brad Pitt just driving? The Brad Pitt storyline is easily way more interesting than Leo's. This movie easily should and could have been 1 hour and 30 minutes. Also, let me preface this by saying when I watched this, I had no idea that this was about the Charles Manson cult. So as the movie begins, Leonardo DiCaprio is an actor, playing an actor. He's on the downside of his career and he's really struggling accepting that fact. Brad Pitt is just a happy-go-lucky stunt double who doesn't really do much. Leo just landed a new role on a Western, and at the beginning he's having a hard time remembering his lines. While all this is happening, Brad Pitt goes and fights Bruce Lee, and then just drives around aimlessly. And fortunately, we get to just watch him drive. Then Leo acts more, then Brad drives more. Then we get to see Leonardo DiCaprio act a little bit more. He starts to get better. We see Brad Pitt drive more. Then we see Leo act a bit more, and then Brad drives more. There were a lot of shots of Brad Pitt driving. Finally, Brad Pitt, while he's driving, picks up a drifter, a hippie girl, and she's part of this cult. So Brad Pitt drives her to this compound where he and Leo used to act about 8 years ago. This is where the movie finally picks up. We're an hour and a half into it at this point. So since Brad and Leo used to work there on a movie set, Brad wants to see the guy who owns it. There's like 20 hippies who don't wear shoes and they don't seem too inviting. Brad checks in with the guy who owns it. He's obviously lost his mind. So Brad decides to leave. When he gets to his car, a man named Flower has slashed his tire. Brad beats the tar out of a guy named Flower. Then we get a time lapse. Brad and Leo both go to Italy for about 6 months to film some spaghetti westerns. And when we come back to the story, they're flying home to the Americas. Leo has married an Italian woman and he cannot afford to pay Brad anymore. So this will be the end of their working relationship. They decide to hang out one more night, extremely intoxicated together. For the first 2 hours and 10 minutes in this movie, I was extremely bored. I didn't realize it was about Charles Manson's story. The last 15 minutes of this movie were insane. So now we're back at Leo's ritzy neighborhood. Brad and Leo are extremely intoxicated. Brad is there with his dog for some reason. His dog is huge. Leo's hanging out in the pool. His Italian wife is sleeping, and Brad is walking his dog. While this is going on, 4 cult members show up. We see they have a plot to go around the neighborhood and start hurting people. These 4 people we recognize from the compound that Brad went to with the guy named Flower. So they break into Leonardo DiCaprio's house. Brad Pitt is standing there about to feed his dog. Leo's in the pool, has no idea what's happening. So they break in and they hold a gun up to Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt's character is so high and drunk at this point, he doesn't know if this is real or not. There's a bit of humor here as the man is holding a gun up to Brad Pitt and then Brad Pitt holds a finger gun back up to him while giggling. They really lead you to believe that Brad Pitt, Leo, and his wife are about to get hurt. So right when the cult members are ready to attack, Brad Pitt snaps his fingers and his dog goes nuts. The dog attacks the man with the gun, instantly tearing off his hand. Then he attacks other parts of that man. That man will never have children. Then one of the girls who has a knife runs at Brad Pitt. This turns out to be a really bad idea. Brad Pitt is holding a can of dog food. He turns in with full force, spikes that can of dog food right in her face. This really happened. Then the dog attacks the girl while she's on the ground. No one will ever recognize her again. To be honest, I'm actually underselling the graphic scenes that are happening here. Finally, another cult member runs at Brad and stabs him in the leg. He then proceeds to bash her face into every object that's in the room. Every object. So Brad finishes off the guy by banging his face into the doorpost. He then finishes off the girl that stabbed him by bashing her face into everything. Then Brad passes out. Finally, the girl whose face we can no longer recognize has found the gun. She really can't see anything, and we really can't see her. She busts out through the patio glass doors, shooting sporadically. Finally, Leo's made aware of the situation. I thought for sure she was gonna kill Leo. Boy, was I wrong. She falls into the pool, still shooting sporadically. We see Leo hop out of the pool and jump into his pool house. Everything in me thought he was just gonna hide in there. The next scene might be the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in a movie, but it was great. The very next thing we see is Leo coming out of his pool house with a flamethrower on. A flamethrower. He then proceeds to flamethrower the girl in the pool. Then Brad goes to the hospital, he's fine, and Leo meets his neighbors. That was the end of the movie. If you're wondering why I didn't talk about Robbie Margot or whatever her name is, it's because I have no idea why she was in this movie. Her storyline made absolutely no sense. It was not vital to this plot at all. I had some pretty high expectations going into this one based on the cast, director, and award nominations. I have to say I was disappointed. I gave the movie a 3 based on my expectations. As far as my experience watching the movie, I was very bored. The first 2 hours and 15 minutes of this movie were hard to watch. I really didn't enjoy watching this movie. As far as experience go, I give it a 4. Brad and Leo were both fantastic as far as acting goes. While I was pretty bored, the acting was very good. I give it an 8. As far as my story rating, knowing that this is based on the Charles Manson stories changes my perception a bit. However, we didn't need 2 hours of build up, and I definitely didn't need 50 minutes of Brad Pitt driving. Give the overall story a 5. Overall, the last 15 minutes of this movie were phenomenal. To be honest, I could have done without the first 2 hours and 15 minutes. I give it a 5. That comes in for a Blaze movie rating of 5 if you average those together, which is right on par with how I feel about the movie. I'd rate the first 9/10 of this movie at about a 2, and the last 10th of this movie was an 8 or a 9 for me. I've never reacted while watching a movie like I did in the last 15 minutes of this movie. For me, it's one of the worst Tarantino flicks, pretty dull and lackluster, then went from 0 to 60 and took your breath away. Again, I have no idea why Margie Robbo was in this movie. I would not watch this movie again. I don't have that kind of time. I would definitely watch the last 15 minutes again. That's all for this Blaze movie review on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Check this movie out. Let me know what you think. Have a great day. God bless.